Thanks for joining us. Happy Friday. My name is Karen Ravago Ballarat. I'm the Director of Alumni Professional Engagement here at the UCSB Alumni Affairs Office, normally on campus pre-pandemic, but coming to you all from Oxnard. So it's nice not to have to commute up to Santa Barbara these days. So we're doing the virtual Gaucho Professionals Expo. Thanks to those of you who have been here earlier this week. So you might have heard my spiel about how this event was in person in LA last year. We were intending to do it in the Bay Area this October and have moved everything virtual like everything else in the world. So it's been great for us to be able to pull in speakers and attendees from all over the world, all over the country. We've got some folks that are still in IV and in Goleta. But just a couple of housekeeping things. Again, you're all muted, but feel free to turn your cameras on if you are comfortable with that. And feel free to type questions into the chat for our speakers. But other than that, welcome again, and I will toss it over to our alumni moderator for today, Beijing Guo.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gaucho's Founders session. My name is Beijing Guo. I'm also a fellow Gaucho. I will be the moderator today. We are very lucky to have a great panel today. Most exciting is that the three entrepreneurs we have invited today, they represent different stages of business. We have Dr. Elon Wang, who founded his company in 2003 and has already had a successful exit. We also have Chuck Gaucho, and Chuck founded his company in 2013. So he's been running it very successfully for almost 8 years. And then we have Jay Freeman, who is very brave to start his company in December 2019. And I think having this variety will give us a very different perspective, and it will be a very interesting discussion. So what we're gonna do, we'll start with an intro. So we'll have the panelists give more details to talk about their experience. And I'll kick off with a couple questions of my own, but what we really like to hear from you is what questions that you are interested in. So please just use the chat feature to type it to everyone, and we want to get to your question as quickly as possible. So a quick introduction about myself. I was a Gaucho graduate, 94 and 95. I had my BS and MS in electrical computer engineering from UC Santa Barbara. Right after that, I moved to Seattle, the rainy city, to join Microsoft. 17 years at Microsoft as a product manager, building essentially enterprise software at scale. And then then I spent 3 years at Amazon Web Services running business. My glory days is running the S3 business, a multi-billion-dollar business now. After that, I've decided to take a break. The break accidentally landed me into starting my own company for 3 years. I'm not as successful as the panelists that we have today, Folded, but now I moved into angel investment and am an LP in one of the local Seattle funds, which focus on female-founded startups. I live in Seattle and I have 3 kids. Great. Now let's start with Dr. Elon Wang.
Yes, thank you, Beijing. And I think I'm the oldest one on the group here because I finished my bachelor's in '82. And so I have my bachelor's, master's, and PhD from UCSB. I finished that in '88. And then I taught at UCSB for a couple of years. And I started my first company. It was called Computer Motion. It was the first company which did surgical robots. And it went public in '97. And then it merged with a company called Intuitive Surgical in 2003. And then Intuitive Surgical today is about a $90 billion market cap company. Computer Motion was a third of that. And they make the Da Vinci surgical robot. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. If you know somebody who's gotten their prostate taken out, or some hysterectomies and some of these procedures are predominantly done with the Da Vinci surgical robot. They do about 1 million surgeries a year right now. So my company became part of Intuitive in 2003. And so it was time to figure out what I'm going to do next. And in 2001, still at Computer Motion, what we did as an experiment, which was very, very exciting to me, was we enabled a doctor in New York City, a surgeon. Two of them sat in New York City, and they operated on a patient who was in Strasbourg, France, and they took out her gallbladder 5,000 miles away. That was actually done on September 7th, 2001. It's called the Lindbergh operation. And so my company, Computer Motion, became part of Intuitive, starting with a brand new sheet of paper, tried to figure out what I'm going to do next. And that procedure stuck in my head. And that's kind of what today you might call telemedicine. Mm-hmm. So I started this company, InTouch Health, in 2003 to focus on that concept: is how do you bring a doctor, not just a surgeon, but anybody, any doctor's intelligence to wherever the patient needs to see that doctor. And if you can believe it, back then the internet was kind of new. Mm-hmm. The concept of an enabling device on the patient side, perhaps with some robotic characteristics. And then we had to build kind of what today you would call as a cloud infrastructure on top of the raw internet. And we put that all together, and we started selling into health systems, which is my background because of the surgical robots. So InTouch Health went forward over the 16, 17 years and became the dominant company for telemedicine in health systems, like Mayo Clinic, UCLA, Cleveland Clinic, partners, et cetera. They're all customers of InTouch Health. And then it came time to figure out how we had a lot of investors, and it came time for liquidity strategy. And one way was to go public. Another way was to end up merging with a company called Teladoc. And Teladoc was already a publicly traded company for about 5 years. They're the dominant provider of telehealth to health plans. In other words, their customers are like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Aetna, Cigna. InTouch's customer base is Mayo, UCLA, et cetera. So we actually were really acquired by them. It was announced in January of this year. It closed July 1st of this year. It was about a $1.1 billion transaction. And now Teladoc is, by far the leading organization in virtual care providing. And everything was on a good slope, but then in March, COVID hit. And some industries have done well, and some industries have not done so well in COVID. And that's just the luck of the draw. Like obviously, airlines and hotels have not done so well, but the one which has done well is virtual care. And so our business has been going like this. I'm now part of Teladoc. I'm the interim head of R&D for the organization. But this area of virtual care is clearly going to have a very significant future. And so there's a lot going on there. So anyway, so that's my background. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Chuck?
Sure. So my name is Chuck Getchell. Got my bachelor's in computer science back in the day, 89. So not that far behind Dr. Wayne there. And I'll tell you what, that was still kind of a claim to fame that I had an email address in 89. And I remember in the CS department looking up on the wall, and the entire World Wide Web, right, was on one poster board there, because UCSB was one of the first few schools, right, that was connected. So when people were like, you had an email address in 1989, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of like having the first fax machine though, right? Nobody could fax you, nobody could email you. It was, and in the bunk, you have no mail, if you remember that. So anyways, that was that was when it all started for me. And I was all about the communication that the internet brought. That was what really fascinated me. And so kind of skipping forward a decade or so, I had some other businesses that I exited, but it was all about creating a better communication system for the internet. So I had a digital agency in 2011 that turned into the company I have today, which is a technology platform to allow communications for multi-location brands to manage their message online. So if you think of Verizon's or any large chain where there's thousands of individual locations, and each location has their own internet footprint, and the communications with the communities with each location, and all that has to be managed ahead. It becomes very complex. And so we created technology that would really pull all that together and allow brands to really manage their presence around the world through the internet. So that's really what it did. So similar, as you said, Dr. Wayne, the businesses that went like this or this during COVID, well, communication at a local level became immensely important. Are you open? Are you safe? What are you doing? And so we had the systems in place to really manage that communication at a local level. So it's been very, very interesting, very, very good for us in a sense where those brands who really didn't have that doubt and suddenly realized they have a huge need to get hyper-specific, hyper-local, and very effective in the ability to communicate with the local community on a day-to-day basis. So we license out our product on a monthly basis, a SaaS model. And yeah, pretty fun, pretty exciting. Pretty much the opposite of Dr. Wayne's in deep medical space, where we're out in the human social media, just chatting it up space. So a little bit for everyone, I guess.
Well, great. Thank you, Chuck. I'm glad to hear both Dr. Wayne and your business are going to thrive post-COVID. It's actually opening up new opportunities for you. And Dr. Wayne, you're way ahead of your time. Telehealth in like early 2000. That's amazing.
I actually, I've done 2 companies and I'm near the end of my career. It's like I'm much slower than everybody in terms of how to make these things go. But please call me Yulin.
Okay, great. Jay?
Hello. So I came to UCSB in 1999 as a College of Creative Studies math major originally, but then transferred pretty quickly into the computer science program they had there. I had always known I was interested in computer science, but I got recruited into the math program. And to be honest, I don't want to mess up getting in. I may as well go in as math and figure out how to change to what I want to do later. And I think that sort of thought process of just opportunity arises, I grasp it, and then I figure out how to manipulate it into the thing that I'm trying to really get to is kind of a pattern in a lot of the things that I've ended up being involved in over the years. Truth be told, don't often, I don't know if I really have ever thought, okay, I need to start something. Let's figure out what I want to start. Let's actively go through the trouble of starting it. But instead, I kind of fall into the middle of a bunch of things and then have to figure out how to turn that into something like a business. I've done a lot of consulting work over the years, and including here in Santa Barbara with like Brian Fox, who's the developer of Bash and Readline and the first employee of the Free Solver Foundation, who's relevant because he's going to come up in a little bit in a second. So I attended grad school here as well for a few years before realizing that the work that I was doing in the field was becoming sufficiently interesting to people that I was spending all of my time doing that and was spending very little of my time on my actual studies. And the result of that ended up being that I needed to figure out how to take that work that I was doing and turn it into a kind of a job. And so that was when I started building an alternative to the App Store for jailbroken iPhones. So if you've heard of jailbreaking the iPhone, I'm essentially at the center of all of that. Everyone online knows me as Sork, and I developed Cydia. And for then the subsequent decade, that was really my identity. And I was the community manager for that entire movement. But while that became more and more difficult in some sense to maintain because Apple really hates that existing. And I mean, as you've seen with a lot of lawsuits now that are going on, there's potential that maybe that's just not okay that they're not allowing these things. But the uh, while in the phase of, okay, I need to figure out something new to do, I started working on a number of other projects. And so I started working on what if I did the same kinds of things I was doing for jailbreaking, but for virtual reality. And I started working on code injection and modification of software for virtual reality systems, and trying to do like third-party add-ins for mixed reality rendering and all sorts of stuff like that. And that was going to take a while to come to fruition. But I then I was in a lot of meetings that were occurring, and I was helping record all those meetings. And I realized that I could use 360-degree video recording, and a lot of the same expertise that I had done in all the transforms and all the graphics, the GPU programming and things like that, in order to construct a package that would allow like small governments in order to be able to quickly do more immersive virtual meetings. So I spent some time working on that. And then it was Brian Fox and some of the other people I had been working with on various consulting projects came to me saying that, hey, we're working on this. We are 3 days into working on this project to build a new free distributed internet. And we want you to be part of this with us. And I grasped into that. And I that is actually that's Orchid Labs. And so you mentioned a company that started in 2019. So Orchid started in 2017. We raised after that meeting, which was actually here in Isla Vista at the Blaze Pizza. Within the next 7 weeks, we managed to raise $4.5 million for that project. And we're able to bring on a small team of people in order to really work on bringing that to fruition. Then in early 2019, we raised a second round of funding, and we raised an additional $43 million. Maybe it was a total, yeah, it was a total 43. So I guess it was an additional nearly $40 million for that project. And our project launched officially in December of 2019 with our actual, we came to market initially, but we are continuing to work on that project. This is all in the kind of cryptocurrency blockchain space, which is part of the reason why it was somewhat easy in the timing of everything in order to be like, oh, let's raise a bunch of money for this project. Now that said, the way that the project had originally been kind of thought of was a marketplace for bandwidth and something like maybe a VPN online. But I really thought we should be working on a more generic internet services project. And so I've been kind of moving the project more in that direction in order to make certain that we really kind of can target computation and do more generic useful things. So said a bunch of things that are kind of maybe somewhat random. To tie a lot of these things maybe together, a lot of the research that I did at UCSB ended up tying into a lot of the things that I ended up doing. And so as an undergraduate, I worked with people at the College of Creative Studies on runtime code modification. And there was one of the lecturers, Murat Karaman, on papers that we published in a workshop on runtime code modification that led to a lot of the stuff I did in jailbreaking. In my graduate work, I spent a lot of time working with Peter Capello on distributed computation systems, and that a lot of that has influenced some of the things that I'm doing with Orchid. I took a number of classes both from students at the College of Creative Studies and then from professors on real-time computer graphics and rendering, which led to a lot of things that I'm actually still, I think very soon, I'm going to be actually the 360 camera stuff with all the meetings is actually going to start really happening in some of the local governments. And so now I'm also a local politician. I'm actually on the board of the Isla Vista Community Services District representing students here in Isla Vista. And that between that and the Local Agency Information Commission, I've now made a lot of connections in the area with relation to trying to get that 360 camera work out. So I do a lot of things in parallel. And in some sense, I'm continuing to be a consultant to this day, even in the companies that I'm a co-founder of. Yeah.
Wow, Jay. So that was a fascinating storyline. So you said you fell into starting a business. It wasn't something that out of the gate you always knew I'm going to start my own company. You just pursued your technical interest. You kept on exploring, kind of driven by intellectual curiosity, and then formed a community of people and kind of organically grew into this $43 million raised fund, which is a huge. It's not a startup we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, yeah. In some sense, also the term startup is something that's always interesting because it's applied to companies at various points, and it's like, I mean, like at some point, despite the fact that Cydia and all the stuff I was doing for jailbreaking, my company was like 2.5 people at most, really ever. It often felt like a startup, but at some point you're like, well, we're 10 years in, and there have been years where I've booked $10 million of revenue in the year. Is this a startup anymore? Like we're not really. And so Orchid is something where we've raised a bunch of money, but we're not. It's an interesting company because it doesn't actually have a revenue model. It's one of these weird cryptocurrency companies that's involved in providing a reason for that currency to exist. And so now a lot of metrics for startups, it's like, well, at some point you're going to have like revenue positive, or, and it's like, well, is that really going to apply to our company? What point do we no longer a startup? But a lot of things I fell into, like the 360-degree camera work, is when I became a local politician, I started having to record a lot of the meetings, and I really wanted to be more transparent. And so I just started realizing I'm spending so much time doing this, I'd better figure out how a way to make it into a business. And I started getting some of the local agencies to actually say, I'd subscribe to that. I'd buy a camera that actually had that kind of functionality. So.
Okay. Yulan, what about you? After teaching at UC Santa Barbara, what got you started to say, hey, I'm going to start my own telehealth company?
You know, I finished, I went through my PhD. My father was a professor at Berkeley. And so I kind of had that crossroad of academics or go into industry and start my own company. And so did my doctorate was in high performance computing for robotic manipulation. And if you write a paper on that, there's probably 50 people who read it and maybe 10 people who understand it. I just wanted to have a greater impact. And so I went the entrepreneurship route because I wanted to build a product which would hopefully be of value to people. And I just through a number of conversations and circuitous route, I stumbled across surgical robots. It was at a point in time, this area of surgery called minimally invasive surgery was just taken off. That's when you use a camera through little holes to operate on a person. And it turned out that by going to that type of surgery, there was room to put technology between the surgeon and the patient, room like to put robots between. And that's where I was able to kind of dovetail in solutions.
Okay. And what about you, Chuck? Did you always wanted to start your own business, or you fell into it?
Well, kind of both. So I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, my first business was 15 years old, and I mean, I've had all kinds of businesses I started and exited. So I've always had that spirit, but never wanting to start a business for the sake of starting it. So for me, it's always about finding a problem and then solving it, right? I mean, it's cliche as that sounds, but it's really true. So it's taking the expertise you have and applying it to a problem that you see in the marketplace. And so for me, its current venture, the company here, we are trying to create communication on the digital space, right? That's a very hard thing to establish the ROI of. It's not just a direct ad return, right? So I was trying to figure out ways to decrease operational expenses and what could be automated and what systems could be created so that the cost could be so low as a no-brainer for companies to apply it. So that's where the problem was in the marketplace. Was like, gosh, we all need this, but not sure how much we want to pay for it. And everything's being done manually. So it was about applying systems, putting systems together to automate things and use AI and all that, kind of pulling it together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, from my own experience of starting a company, I felt as an entrepreneur, it is a very strange balance of irrational self-confidence on days that you're so convinced you've got the right idea, you're the brilliant person, especially if you're coming off a great investor meeting. And then 24 hours later, you have a little bit of a setback and you have this tremendous amount of self-doubt that, oh, I made the biggest mistake. I should just stop right now. I'm stupid. My idea is stupid. It's never going to work out, etc. Right? So my question to all three of you is that, at what point did you know that you actually had the right idea? So let's start with Jay.
So with each of the things that I've worked on, in some sense, I felt like I had the right idea when it started to feel like it could be something that a business could be built out of. And so when it was something that I was solving my problem, and then it started to solve somebody else's problem. So in the case of like jailbreaking, I was really I'd gotten involved in the community as somebody who wanted to utilize the technology very early on, like a couple months in, but the tool chains and compile all the like technology that was like underlied, it wasn't really there.
Mhm.
And I spent a lot of time making all that happen. And then I realized just how much of the ecosystem was reliant on the work that I did. And I was like, I think I could make a business that actually sustained me on this.
Mhm.
And with the camera technology was when it's really saving me time, and other districts were like, hey, the videos you're constructing for your district are so good, we want that too. Um, it's when other
At
people
the,
want it.
right. At the point you actually have a real customer who see value and maybe willing to pay for it, that you can actually build a business model on top, right? Okay. Um, Chuck, what about you?
Similar. So for a long time, I was trying to license the technology that I was looking for, and I kept giving advice and ideas to these companies, saying you could tweak it like this. And I finally got tired of giving advice to them that they weren't taking, and I decided I would just build it myself. That's kind of the simple solution. And now today, we have a huge advantage because we have tens of thousands of clients who tell us all their micro problems of our technology, which allow us all that feedback, which is fantastic. So we can continue to reinvent ourselves on literally a monthly basis. So yeah, it's just constantly finding the problems and solving them.
And if you have customers who are actually pointing out gaps in your product and
Right.
willing to engage with you, that means they're really in the same space. They see the same opportunity and issues, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So our biggest challenge is how to discern the right problems versus, since we have thousands of them shared with us.
Yeah, yeah. And Yulan, I am really curious because you were building technology for the healthcare industry, which is notoriously hard to break into from sales perspective. And you, obviously, the PhD in robotics. So how did you get into that? How did you handle the sales and the marketing aspect of your business?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And just back to your earlier point about being an entrepreneur, you do need unwavering optimism, because you are going to get beat down over and over and over again.
Yes.
And I think that coming from a technology side and not having any training at the early on in anything on the commercial side, the sales and marketing, you kind of have a point of view, or at least I did, that hey, all the cost and everything's all in the development of the technology or the product. And then I actually remember thinking selling in healthcare was going to be easy, because you just follow the blue signs which say slow off the freeway, as opposed to trying to find a very hard to find customer base. Well, it turns out selling in a hospital is really, really difficult. And the spend that we made in both companies on the sales and marketing side, I don't actually never sat down and calculated it, but it was many, many, many times the spend that we did on the technology side. And back to your original question in terms of when you had an idea, and I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, the first step is, do you have a product someone's willing to exchange money for?
Mhm.
And then the second step is, will they exchange enough money to leave you enough margin to then build an organization which you can make profitable? And I think that second step is actually much harder than that first step, because it's just building an operational organization to fit within the margin dollars that you have from selling the product is really, really hard. And that's actually why I personally, some people, they think they have a great idea and they're very afraid to share it with anybody. I'm not that way at all, because the reality, if when you share ideas, people share back. And if you shut down, then there's no exchange. But if you know how hard it is to transfer an idea to a product to a viable business, then you don't have to worry about sharing it with somebody else and the fact that they're going to run with it, because it's a lifelong journey to do that. So
that is such a great point, Elon. I wanted to explore on that one because from my own startup experience, I realized my training as an engineer in some way made me somewhat a perfectionist in my own product development. And I was, if I'm honest with myself, I was scared to say my product is complete. Yeah. Scared of putting to the market because I'm a little afraid that no one would want it, right? So I felt that my comfort zone was just get the investor money, keep on perfecting my product, because as an engineer, I have a long list of ideas to continue put to the product, right? And I can always see imperfections, but that is perhaps one of the biggest mistake I've made. I should have be talking with customers, putting it out there, kind of let the market give me feedback on what's really needed.
Yeah, I would actually even take that one step further. 20, 30 years ago, I read a paper out of Harvard Business Review, and it was called Probe and Learn. So lots of times people go, hey, getting market feedback is getting a bunch of potential customers, showing them a product concept, asking them what they think. And the people say, oh yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is great. But then if you take it to the next step, you say, will you buy it? Then they say, oh, no, I'm not going to buy it. That's not for me. That's for that person. And that's in the whole concept of the probe and learn is to really do market feedback in an entrepreneurial way on an early stage, perhaps discontinuous innovation. You got to try to sell it. You don't just try to ask people about it. You got to try to sell it and see where the objections come in.
That is a great point. Okay. Let me just remind the audience very quickly that if you have any questions, feel free to type into the chat box. And if you have a specific panelist that you want to direct a question to, please also just do that. We look forward to hearing what questions that you have. So here's a question I am really curious about. What is one thing about entrepreneurship that surprised you, that caught you off guard, that you weren't quite prepared for, that you wish you knew before you got started? Jay?
Something that surprised me. It's a little different. Okay. There's a lot of assumptions, I think, on like what table stakes are for a company that you don't necessarily need. And the realization of that was, first of all, kind of game changing for my ability to operate interesting companies that were able to fit within that, as described by somebody else, fit within that margin on particular types of products. But also, I mean, continually confuses accountants that I work with or other people I interface with. And it's like looking at, if you're going to certain kinds of like 1099 type paperwork, for example, you've got to file. Well, it turns out if you pay people with credit cards, you don't have to file the 1099 paperwork because the credit card company does that for you. So I would rather spend the time to set up a contractor or consultant to the ability to accept credit cards, such that I never have to worry about giving them paperwork ever again. And doing all of those things that have essentially automating a lot of my own accounting, because I'm a technology person, so I'm able to start and build software for a lot of that stuff. Although in some sense, my core business for Cydia was a billing system in some way, so it's just like maybe it made more sense to me to spend my time on it. But the ability to always be able to operate with a very small number of people, and every time I ask myself, do I need a person or do I really just need a 3-hour consult with an expert in that topic area? So.
There is a lot of
surprising thing, but
yeah, there's surprisingly a long list of logistics that you have to set up just to operate a company. Yeah. Chuck, what about you? Is there anything that you felt unprepared for, you wish you knew?
I don't know if I was unprepared. I think not prepared at all would probably be more appropriate. I wrote down your statement, irrational self-confidence. I hadn't quite heard it put that way, but I would say that would be probably the biggest component. You're going to come up with so many things that you don't know right now. And you just have to know that they're going to hit you. You just have to be open to that. You have to receive that. You have to figure out ways to pivot around that, work through that, solve it. Figure out. You're constantly figuring things out, right? You're solving 1,000 problems a day, and it takes energy. It takes a lot of work, and you have to be the optimist and finding that additional margin as you scale. I mean, that changes everything, right? So having a small team versus having a larger team. That sets a whole nother set of problems. So you're just constantly growing into another set of problems, and that's fine as long as you embrace that. Every time you achieve another level of problems, you've just made the barrier of entry, like you're saying, hard for someone else to do what you've done. So the farther you go, the more problems you solve, the more it's going to be difficult to recreate what you've done, which is a positive. So it's really a mindset. I think probably for me, the biggest thing is to say there's going to be a mindset. Your mindset's got to be, you're going to enter into a minefield. You're going to step on a whole lot of mines, and you're going to be fine if you choose to be fine. You got to figure it out, and you just know that's the business you're in. You're in the business of solving problems, no matter what business you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yulan, what about you? Other than surprised by how much it costs to sell into healthcare, were there any gotchas?
I think piggybacking on what Chuck was just talking about, I often describe the most important characteristic of an entrepreneur is persistence. And because one of my mentors early on, his name's Bob Duggan. He's been a big donor to UCSB. He said, I think I was having a conversation with him about how I was really afraid to fail. And then he said to me, "What do you mean you're afraid to fail? The only time you actually fail is if you give up. And if you don't give up, you haven't failed." And so that kind of kept going. And then the question was, God, if I failed, how bad would that be? And he said, "You got a PhD in engineering, you can get a job. I mean, it's not, so how bad can that be?" So it basically helped a lot with my mental mindset in order to kind of put everything in context.
That is true. You're prepared for the worst case, and the worst case is really not that bad. You're just going to
Get a
work
job.
in the company.
You'll be fine. That's awesome.
Okay, I see the audience are very active with a bunch of questions, so we'll start there. Okay. Oh, actually, let me answer my own questions. One thing that caught me off guard when I started my own company, as an engineer, I was very confident with my ability to define and build a great product. And I knew I needed a partner to help me on the sales and marketing side. So that was something, it's a gap that I knew. What surprised me is how competent I will have to be on fundraising around this whole capitalization strategy. And I thought, how hard would it be just to fundraise? It's not just that, it's not just pitching, but you also have to think through your strategy of to provide a capital, how you're going to spend the capital, how you're going to drive to a meaningful milestone, which drive up the value of your company so you're prepared for the next round. It's like it's a whole set of skills that I was not prepared for. So which leads us really well to the next question from Steve. When dealing with investors, how do you make sure you don't sell too much of your stake in the company? Yulan, you've gone through a couple rounds.
More than a couple.
More than a couple, and then come out all right. So
the thing is, what's so important and so hard to really do is who is your partner in the investors, because it turns out that's really important when things get tough. Mm-hmm. And then as they inevitably will. And then the other thing is what the question's phrased in a way which is basically, I think, the normal way people think about how do I minimize how much of my company I sell. I don't actually think of it that way. I mean, the bottom line is everybody has to win for a successful move forward. And so if you try to overvalue, and let's say you're able to even convince people to put in that value, and then you've overshot your expectation, it's a very painful process to unravel that with what's typically called a down round or something like that. You're much better off keeping everybody moving together where they all believe they're gaining value, as opposed to a group saying, "Oh God, I overpaid for a long period of time," and that might be hanging over you for years, if not forever. And so So it's not a matter of how, how do you minimize how much you give away, is how do you set the right value? And that's a hard problem too, but that's a different frame of mind than I think the question.
Great. Jay, do you have a perspective on that? Because your company just rounded up 43 million.
Yes, there's like two aspects of when you sell stake in your company. And so one of them is whatever upside the company might end up having eventually, you're selling some percentage of that upside to people. But then it's almost separate. And like in our case, it actually was separate. They're selling the ownership and control over it. And those don't have to be the same percentages, even though it might feel like, naively you sell the ownership in it, and then the ownership is some percentage of the upside. You can structure all of your contracts or your business model such that you can sell more upside or less control or whatever the investor wants. In the case of Orchid, we actually sold none of the company. Like the company is entirely owned by myself, Seven, and Brian, and then we chose to bring in a couple other people, or other people who had actually been like heavily involved in the project. We've never sold any of the actual ownership or control of the company to any of our investors, but we've sold a lot of the upside in the form of the way that our business model is relating to this separate thing, which is this cryptocurrency, and we've sold parts of that. All the other companies I've worked on that I have most directly started, I bootstrapped. And then another company I was one of the co-founders for, but I was really the technology person for. We did bring on local investors, and it was that was almost kind of a lesson in investor control, in the form of like, we got really pushed on, well, you need to do it in a certain way, and that kind of I kind of think really killed the project. And so.
Well, I think dealing with investors can be its own session on its own. Well, we can have like 5 hours talking about that, right? Great. All right, here's a question from Diane. What keeps you focused on your goals? How do you balance personal and professional goals? And I want to pile up on that. Have you ever considered quitting, and what kept you going? Chuck, we'll start with you.
No, ever consider quitting every day, right? I mean, yeah, there's days like, I wish I just had a job in my own company, right? Like, it just, certain days I'd rather just clock in and clock out. Let's face it. You're last in line for everything. But at the end of the day, I would never quit. And I think it's just a mindset. Just, again, you go into it going, yeah, we're going to make this happen. I do think that question is very valid, though, because you can get consumed, obviously, 24/7 in your company, and easy to do, easy to justify. There's always a reason to justify that. So other things could really get hurt. So I think it's important personally. I'm not a big balance word user. I don't think balance necessarily is right. I think it's about prioritizing things. So making sure you know what your priorities are, and making sure you make time for those priorities. So sometimes it might have some heavy family things going on, and that's going to be a heavy family period. Other times heavy business, but what are your priorities, and make sure you get those priorities lined up and then stay true to those priorities. There's times I've had a commitment with my son, and I have a business call come in that I've been trying to connect with this person for a long time. But I made a commitment to be with my son at his golf tournament. And so I'm going to be with my son, and that person's will just have to make that call another time. Right. So then there's other times I'm in a business meeting and kids want to do something. Well, kids are going to need to wait, obviously. Right. So it's a matter of priorities to me. And you just make sure you got those lined out and then stick to it. It's hard to stick to it. You're going to get pulled.
Yes, it's hard. It
Yes.
requires a lot of discipline, because if you let it, the business will consume you entirely.
Oh, yeah. Know it.
Elon, what about you? Because you've been at it for a long time.
Yeah, I think Chuck said it well. I think that, setting priorities, and then just to emphasize a point which he made, but I'll double emphasize it. You don't have to think about the prioritization on a daily basis, like an hour for, whatever for work, whatever for family, on a day-to-day basis. You go through these ebbs and flows.
Right.
there are points in times in your business you have to run as fast as the treadmill is turning. It's just going to be, and it might go for a couple of years like that, or even a little longer. And then there are points in times where you can slack it a little bit for 6 months or something like that. So I would suggest to think about it in terms of longer periods of times, not daily segmentations of times.
So your family has to be fully supportive your entrepreneurship, because without that support, you won't be able to run as fast as the treadmill is turning, right?
Yeah, and I have 4 kids, and you know, they're met my wife at UCSB, and they're very supportive, and you know, the other thing I learned from, again, Bob Duggan, is with their kids, it's not necessarily how much time you spend with them, it's the quality time you spend with them. And so a little bit to, again, to what Chuck said, is like, you know, an hour of quality time with your kids, much more than 3 hours where you're with them in the same room, but you're doing other stuff. So
you have to be present when you spend your time. And it's hard to be present when your mind is on a million things that you want to solve in the business. Right? Okay. Now we have a question from Jake on partnership. Okay, let me read the question for the panel. Have you ever taken on a partner that you wish you hadn't? And how did you resolve the issue? Elon, since I have you here.
Yeah, so I have that in deep experience, and you know, I guess I won't narrow the scope very much, but I had a venture capital investor who, during the courting time, seemed like the nicest guy in the world and very synergistic thinking, but when it came down to liquidity and control time, it was a very different story. And quite honestly, I just had to deal with that for an extended period of time. And so it gets back to, it's a really hard thing to do in terms of, you know, what are the characters of the investors you bring in on the front end. It's a little bit like hiring or even picking a spouse. It's you don't know exactly what you're getting into when you get in there. But in this particular case, it was very much the what you hear about all the time, where the investor was always on what's in it for me and what's in it for me and my fund, as opposed to how do I help make the company successful, and as a consequence of that, I'll do well. It's a very subtle but significant shift, and I'll never work with that person again, for example. But it made my navigating more difficult.
But you managed to maneuver out of that situation successfully.
I did, yeah.
Well, lucky for you. I had a very similar situation. Is that I give away a big chunk of my company very early on to a day zero investor. And I was inexperienced, but that eventually became a problem on my cap table for future rounds of fundraising. And when I went back to the negotiation table with my initial investor, we weren't able to come to agreement. And even though he realized that if he does not accommodate, there will not be a future for my company. But again, to your point, he was very focused on what's the return for him, as opposed to the total opportunity for the company. So yes, the investors you pick are essentially your first set of partners. They're very critical to your success. I agree with that. Jay, you seem to be sidestepping that issue. Where is Jay there?
I'm here. I mean, that question is if you want me to talk about something, I would love to give my answer for the personal balance question.
Please, go ahead.
I'm almost somewhat famously actually in a position where I was community manager for Cydia for 10 years and honestly started to hate it and started to hate a lot of the people who were involved in it, and started to feel that the way that the community drifted was demoralizing, and it was a very lonely experience. It was something that I hated. I mean, I hated doing it. But at the same time, I guess one of the things when you talk about like these goals and what you're trying to accomplish, because of the way that I fall into things, my professional goals are my personal goals in some weird way. And so like, but what the fight, the movement for something like jailbreaking was sufficiently important that I sometimes, I mean, it was like a year where I was just like, every single day I was like, I need to figure out a way to stop doing this. All my friends are telling me to stop doing it. And I had to keep going, because it's like I have to make that mission happen. The reason I started doing all this 360 camera stuff is I care so much about government transparency, and I hated so much the way the county and some of the smaller districts even they don't provide any ability to see things. And so it's like, if I stop working on this, is this going to happen? I don't know if it's going to happen. It doesn't seem like anyone else is doing this. The fight with Orchid is something where it's like I have to make something in this space work, because of all the fights we're seeing right now with Section 230 and all of the much less the things from over the last few years with network neutrality, and it's something where it's almost, it's really unfortunate when you're trying to talk about like the personal professional balance, because it's like when the goals that you have for your company are things where it's like I will feel like a horrible person if it doesn't succeed in this way. What does that do for the rest of anything you might consider to be a personal goal? And so and that's, I think, where it starts to get ridiculously hard. And that's, I also want to provide a little more color on this idea of like the prioritizations. Prioritization is easy for me when it's okay, I have a friend or a family member who needs me today, or even something like example of like the soccer game. But as far as like prioritizing somebody is also about making certain that I spend the same 3 days that I agonized over figuring out how a particular piece of software works, figuring out 3 days of agonizing over how to make a particular friendship work or how to help a family member in a certain way. And I'm just be honest, I suck at that, because I end up allocating and burning all of my time towards the figuring out the future of these various movements I'm involved in, as opposed to working on my personal relationships. And it's hard. It's hard. Don't do this. Don't get into building a company and having people rely on you on a daily basis. It's even like when you have employees, it's like if I stop working on this slightly, it's like that their livelihoods are going to be affected. And so, well, I totally tell my employees, don't pay any attention to this today. You need to go off, do things, whatever. It's like that. It's because I pick up all the slack on everything, and I have to, because if I don't, I mean, they're relying on me. And it's hard. Don't do
Yeah,
this if you think it's going to be easy.
that's the best summary. It's hard, Jay.
Yeah.
Great. We have a few minutes left, so I'm about to wrap up. So Elon, you have a hard stop at 12 o'clock. So let's start with you. If you have one piece of advice for someone who's starting out, what would it be?
I think that if you're a first-time entrepreneur, what I've told people many times is you got to get some mentors around you who you get along well with and trust. Because I was very fortunate. I mentioned Bob Duggan's name early on. I would have just gone nowhere if I didn't have him and some other people around me who believed in me and believed in the vision, and then kind of we went from there. So I think if that's probably my core advice.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Elon.
Okay, so I'm gonna sign off then. Okay, so
Yes, yes.
thanks for having me, and I greatly appreciated the opportunity.
Oh, lucky to have you. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Jay, your piece of advice to someone who's starting out?
The way the world is organized is just a construct that somebody else did at some point. I mean, when I was, a kid and growing up learning what jobs existed, and you learn about the existence of a flight attendant and the existence of a waiter and the existence of, this is all somebody who started a business at some point and then started figuring out how to organize the interior of their business. And it's like, well, it'd be nice if we had somebody whose job was to, do this task. And then that becomes something that's really hard and fixed and organized to the point where people will even like grow up thinking like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be this thing that was just an idea that somebody else had. And the job that somebody growing up right now have is this job that you might end up constructing as part of the organizational process of the kind of company that you end up working on. And the way you organize your company doesn't have to be the same way that other people organize their companies. And if you're building something truly new and innovative, it almost certainly won't be. I mean, all the social media companies having these social media moderators that are now so at the forefront of a lot of things. I mean, that was a very recent job that got constructed.
So don't be constrained by the word that you see today. That's great advice. Thank you. Chuck?
Yeah, I like that. I like the creativity concept there. I would say, I've always said there's really three things. There's one's the mentorship that we just heard about. Make sure that you're getting input, you're bouncing your ideas off, you're not, leading yourself too much. The second thing is the opposite. Like, don't fake yourself out. Like, everybody, I got this great idea. Really? Says who besides you? Right? So get some market feedback. I mean, really see, are people like it? Are they going to pay for it? Like, don't fake yourself out, right? Solve problems that people really care about and prove it that they care about it. And then the last thing is always, it's going to come down to mindset. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to your mindset. You're going to have to grind. You're going to have days you're going to want to quit. You're going to have days you doubt yourself. You're going to have all that stuff. And you need to just know that and embrace that and just say, if I'm going to step into this game called ownership, I better have the mindset to play with the big boys, right? Mentally, I better be able to get out there every day, get myself geared up, however you're going to do that, and know I'm going to deal with a whole lot of crap. And I'm going to overcome it. I'm going to overcome it every day, day in, day out. I'm going to overcome it because I choose to. And if they don't have that mindset, you're just going to get run over. It's just going to happen. So as long as you have that mindset, then you can plan that after a whole lot of pivoting, a whole lot of working, you're going to expect to see some great success.
That is awesome, Chuck. That's a wrap, everyone. Thank you so much, the panelists. What a great discussion. And the audience, thank you for your participation and great questions. And I hope everybody found something useful from today's session. So stay healthy, stay safe, and remember to vote.
Thank you, Beijing, for having a great conversation. Thank you again to the audience for joining us today. Audience members, you'll be getting a quick follow-up email from us with a survey and some reminders on how to connect with folks, how to sign up for our gauchonetwork.com platform. But yeah, we thank you for joining us. Hopefully we will see people in week 2, but it's been a great first week of the expo. So thank you everyone, and hopefully we will see you soon.